Hello again to Jocelyn Brewer. Okay, so we are here again from 2018 when we had our very first conversation on the podcast. And in 2018, we were discussing how to approach social media, how to approach digital devices as a family, as a society, thinking about your concept of digital nutrition. So, number one, welcome again, Jocelyn. I'm really sorry we have to do this 5 years down the line, 6 years down the line, 7 years down the line, and so on and so forth. But just for people who probably haven't gone back that far to listen, do you want to explain who you are and why I've kind of come after you again to have a
Oh,
conversation?
sure. So I am Jocelyn Brewer. I'm a psychologist. I am down here in unceded Wongal land or on Warane, which is the Aboriginal word for Sydney. So we like to start some of our kind of interactions by just acknowledging that we are on stolen Aboriginal land. It's a little protocol we do down here. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's who I am and where I am. I guess, yeah, I came to this work as I was retraining from being a high school teacher into being a school counselor, and then doing an honours thesis, which was on boys and games, and then just got really obsessed with the whole notion of, I guess, cytopsychology. And I did a master's. It took me a long time, but
Hmm.
I finished it in 2021, looking at really how self-control can be a really key skill in helping young people manage their smartphone use.
Now I'm just going to throw that out there. Don't forget that, of course, if you listen to the media, there is no ability to control emotions. There's no delayed gratification in today's society. So what are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, what I was talking about was the misconception
Mm,
that self-control just happens. It's a switch that people either have or don't have, and
yeah.
that social media turns off. And in fact, social self-control requires us to have something in the future worth delaying that gratification for. And some of my thesis was about, well, what kind of planet are we giving to young people? What kind of futures are we painting for them? And that's only gotten worse, obviously, in the last year.
Hmm.
And even, yesterday, Australia has announced, oops, we have actually let our climate increase by 1.5%. We meant not to do that, but it's already there. So there's bigger, I guess a lot of my work has shifted probably in the last little while that I've spoken
Mm,
to you, really being much more kind of come back where I started, which was as a human geographer and looking at humans interacting with their environment and the sociocultural kind of context that we exist in,
yeah.
which is not purely technological. It is not just about the iPhones or the iPads or the smartphones or the socials. It's about the society that we capture and
Hmm.
connect with that. So it's also shifted a lot from, rather than interventions for young people, to being interventions for adults and for families. So I no longer do student presentations. I don't go into groups of 200
Hmm.
U9 students and expect to revolutionize them and get them to put their phone down and go to bed early, because that's just not realistic. I can't track impact. So my work has definitely shifted over that, 7 years. Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's since we've known each other, but you and
Mm.
I have been in this space for a long time because actually we met, I think it was on Twitter as it
It
was called,
was.
XFKA Twitter. There is a lot to be said. My goodness, my head's just gone totally off what I thought I was going to ask you right at the outset. So let me just backtrack a bit. So when we first started talking and we had our first like podcast episode, and I was thinking about how I reflected it in the book. The idea of digital nutrition I have seen has been, let's say, replicated without citation.
Mm, mm.
And the whole space at the moment of let's give everybody that recipe to put your phones down and go to bed early. And um I'm just thinking about, do you want to take us through what your early thinking was around
Mhm.
this idea of digital nutrition and why that metaphor still stands, why it's a really incredibly healthy way to think about, you know, one aspect, and I want to make that very clear, it's one aspect of our lives, not
Yes.
everything as is currently being chicken littled.
Yes. Yeah. So look, digital nutrition came out of my mouth when I was on a radio interview. I was still working as a school counselor. I remember standing in the school car park thinking, oh gosh, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. But we were talking about digital detoxing. And there had been the notion of the digital diet. Daniel Seberg's first book was about that. There was, you know, the information diet from Clay Johnson. And so there were people using this food analogy, but I took it another kind of step and to contrast it with digital detoxing, which to me just sounded horrible, right? The idea of going on a diet or going on a juice cleanse or any of that stuff is just not for me. And we know from like all the research about food and nutrition that yo-yo diets don't work, that you're likely to, you know, actually put on more weight in the long run. It's about small and sustainable change. So I kind of thought, well, you know, technology is kind of much more like food than it is a drug. It's something that we're using for many purposes. There are good bits of it. There are probably not so good bits of it. And I really just kind of built out a philosophy around, you know, not being so focused on screen time, which is like counting digital calories. You know, empty calories really doesn't tell us anything about our diet and our nutrition and our health, but focusing on some of the virtual vitamins that we could find within our online activities when we really get to the granular level. So who are we following? What are our interactions? What kind of information are they giving us? When we're playing video games, are we collaborating? Are we problem solving? Are we just grinding? Are we playing alone? Are we playing together? So really looking at some of those kind of aspects of it and thinking if, you know, apps and games came with nutritional labels, what would be the things that we're looking for? I sort of talk about, you know, obviously the digitally nutritious stuff, the stuff that really, you know, feeds our psychological needs of competence, connection, and control. But also looking out for some of the highly processed foods that we now know are quite everywhere in the form of AI-generated content, and really needing kind of labels for this is AI made, and therefore there's a certain level of processing that happens to information and images.
Yeah, I actually saw this morning, I think it was. No, yesterday morning, because this morning I'm talking to you, so I wasn't doing it was yesterday morning. So one of the big podcasters from the US, he was AI copied in terms of saying things about certain devices and ways to use health interventions that wasn't his. So I am seeing that we probably will get the labels around AI, and that's more than likely going to be it, isn't it? And I'm really curious actually. How would we even define what is healthy and unhealthy when we've got an entire population of differing needs, differing educational needs, differing ages. And of course, even if we do have those guidance labels on, I'm just thinking here about the PEGI and the ERSB ratings, they just get ignored in most cases anyway.
Yeah. And it's a really good point. I try and move away from saying healthy because it's so moralistic and it's so personal and it's so privileged as well. So I try and talk more about healthful, or, you know, harms and hurts, or, you know, those kinds of things, rather than purely healthy. But and the same with balanced. I try not to use the word balance, because balance to me, if I'm kind of balancing on, you know, a ball in my nose or something, I can't move forward. I can't be responsive to things in my environment. And we know that the world's a really complex place that we need to be able to respond to. So it's more about getting the blends right. It's about looking at what's generally the content that you're consuming, and also what's the context. And again, like this morning, I was doing some interviews where we harked back to those dark days of COVID lockdowns, where the context there was, thank goodness we had screens to help us get through that, right? So context is everything. Content is really important. The cognitions that we're actually deploying when we're scrolling, when we're gaming, when we're interacting, when we're commenting are really important as well. And I don't think the research really looks at what are the cognitions. So if I'm if I'm on a social media platform and I'm looking at your videos and looking at your followers and going, oh my gosh, Kath has like exploded her work, and what am I doing with my 5,000 little followers? That can be really detrimental, as opposed to going, well, I haven't done that much and I've done all these different things and vanity metrics and blah, blah, blah. So just digging into like, what are we actually thinking when we're doing these things is another really important piece that I guess gets missed in those bigger conversations about youth mental health and social media. Like social media is not this one instrument. It's so many data points that we then create those schemas around that, yes, sometimes get into some tricky spaces. But again, it's the socio-cultural kind of context, not just the fact that it's delivered through a particular device.
You know, as you were talking then, I was like, there's a little bit of sing-songy stuff going on in my head in terms of, what you're really describing is that nuanced, complicated, multifaceted, multi-layered process of being a human.
Yeah.
And in this space right now, and I'm talking about the whole of the technology research approach, there's a lot around nomenclature. And even when you talk about words like health, now I can't remember which book it was. I think it was the Blue Book. When I first started, I talked about, well, what is health? We can't even get that definition right in terms of what that means, whether it's from a World Health perspective or whether we're thinking about, I don't know, healthy meal. And I'm doing the air quotes for those that are going to be listening, like that healthy meal. What does that mean? How is it healthy? Who is it healthy for? When is it healthy? Given the context that you're talking about, we're in a really sticky place at the moment. So definitely, and I would certainly say you and I read the research. Or maybe we tried to read some of the research because some of it is just woolly, fluffy psychobabble. There is a lot around counting. And this is what I found particularly in the research is there's a lot about we've counted this many cases of, and it doesn't go into the nuances like the cognitions, and we're not looking at the different types of young people that might be in those spaces. And we make a blanket brush approach, don't we? Well, all children, all young people, and it's very grandiose. And then we kind of overgeneralize in terms of, I'm using psychology terms here, I'm aware, and I'm trying not to. But then we overgeneralize and we go, well, that must mean it's the same for everybody, which has brought us to this point in time of picking an age for delaying social media, picking an age, and there are arbitrary numbers in some of the cases. But actually, you've had this occur in Australia in a way that is being championed for across the globe. And yet, she says, and yet, doing that little comma, there's a lot of evidence that says that putting these things in place is not really based on longitudinal research. It's based on cherry picking. I can. Your face is saying it. So for those not listening, I'm just going to let go on then, Jocelyn. Your opinion, please.
Okay, so I'm going to back it up a little bit and say in the state that I live in, New South Wales, our premier came into government in March 2023 on a platform of we are going to ban phones in schools, and by term 4, so a year ago, smartphones were banned in New South Wales schools. There was no benchmarking done to look at any of the data points we were apparently like that we're going to address be addressed by the ban. So, distraction or all of these different things. So as far as I know, there was no, really specific, what are we measuring? Why are we doing this? Let's take a baseline and then let's test it. There is, as far as I know, no actual data then on the success of this. However, we hear people saying how successful it is based on apparently young people speak to one another in the playground now, and that playgrounds are full of laughing children. Okay.
I do see that a lot. And I'm like, yeah, but what is that, without sounding like a researcher, what is the operationalized hypothesis here? What is it we're looking at?
Okay. But apparently young people talking to one another, who knows what they're saying? We're not appraising, are they speaking gently and beautifully to one another? A little statistic that I'll give you that correlates with this is the fact that assaults in New South Wales schools have also been on the very sharp increase and did not significantly decline when phones were removed. And my and I'm going to say this publicly for the first time, I have a little hypothesis I would like to go and play around with and tinker with, because correlation is where it's at, right? We don't need to find causation to kind of say things publicly. Is that the idea of banning phones was that they're going to hang out, they're going to play, but who's structuring their play? who's actually showing kids who maybe have never had these kind of useful instructional lessons? Do they need it? I don't know. My guess is yes, because there's not a sense of embodiment. There's not a sense of enough basketball hoops. There's not a climbing wall, a way for often young men to really feel embodied and to kind of be in their environment. We expect them not to be on their phones, but sit and read a book. And that just isn't going to happen from a developmental perspective.
Yeah.
So I think there's some, interesting kind of things to dig into. That is the rumbling and the play and all of that turning into assaults and turning into higher level kind of reportable things in schools that we're not seeing a decline in because phones went away. My guess is it's actually going to kind of stay steady because there's not clear instruction and purposeful things to do in playgrounds for young people.
Yeah.
And I would probably extend that a little bit to say society really doesn't like teenagers. We don't give them places to be. They're not allowed to be in the mall. They're not allowed to loiter. If you're a brown young person, it's even worse. It's actually dangerous for you to be hanging out. So
yeah,
that's my smartphone ban part. But
so I'm going to jump in there, Jocelyn, right? And I was going to do the two I was going to do the two approaches. There's a commentary comedic, which is, well, of course, that's because they don't know how to climb trees anymore, and there's not enough broken arms in the world.
Down.
Whatever that means, there's not enough broken arms to significantly prove, air quotes again, children know how to take risks, because broken arms are the indicator, and that's how we measure whether children take risk or not.
Yeah.
But actually, the serious point here, and I was just going to ask if it's the same in Australia, is particularly in the UK, we have these, they're called ASBO orders. Okay, so this is antisocial behaviour orders.
Oh.
If you are a young person and you are not, in air quotes, doing a sport, and you're hanging around or you're chatting with your mates and having, in air quotes again, bants, then you are required to be almost given one of these youth pathology type process. You can't stand here. You can't hang around at a bus stop.
Wow.
You can't go here. We've closed all of the youth clubs. It's absolutely, as you said earlier, a huge issue. And we've blamed these blinking things that they hold in their hands. But actually, where's that level of embodiment? I like the way that you were talking about embodiment, but I was thinking, actually, where's the level of young babies and toddlers? Because in the United Kingdom, we've got rid of all the centres where those places of play used to begin. So even in toddlerhood, children do not learn to play with each other. And we'll just say it's the phone. And then they go to a primary school and they're not allowed too much excessive time and they've got to sit on their bottoms. And of course, we'll blame the phone. And then they go into the playground and we take everything away from them because of health and safety, but let's blame the phone, and so on. And we're at this point now that you've eloquently just described. I like your thesis.
And it goes further because, again, in New South Wales, we now have a thing called a transport-orientated development that pretty much cuts through all of Sydney along all of the train lines that say you can build, and this is in broad brushstrokes, but you can build 8 to 10 stories to solve our housing crisis. Nowhere in that planning is for green spaces because, by now Sydney is 230 years old, that you can't just put green spaces in, but you can't put in, facilitated youth spaces. You put in a room and say, oh, go play ping pong. Like, I'm sorry, that's not enough anymore. That's not what young people need. They need facilitated services. So we say, oh, go and live in a box, but don't play on your phone. Don't be outside. Don't be here. Don't be there. And, thankfully, so far, we don't have those orders, but we have reduced the age of criminal responsibility in the Northern Territory down to 10. And our Queensland state election was just won basically on a youth violence platform where cracking down on young people and teaching them those hard lessons of juvenile justice was what they were running. So I feel like I've missed the part where I got in the DeLorean back to the 1950s, but there are so many wacky things that are so antithetical to, I thought, where we were moving as a society, using youth voice, consultative processes, creating spaces for young people to take those risks rather than wrapping them up in cotton wool. It's it's just wild to me, right?
Yeah. I mean, as you were talking about the height of the buildings, I was just thinking, so now we're getting rid of sunlight as well. And it's almost like, well, we don't need these things as human beings. So,
Yeah, the quality of our cities, and again, to go back as a human geographer and think about what do people need? What do we learn? I remember actually doing my high school certificate nearly 30 years ago and looking at the impact of high-rise housing council flats in the UK and how that created such poor standards of living that they
mm,
were, you know, and
mhm.
again in New South Wales, we've demolished most of those and moved those away because it just kind of creates such difficult, you know, conditions for people. So I'm kind of confused by you know our lack of evolution in some ways, though. Um, you know, we are now like the next level is banning young people from social media spaces until they're apparently 16. And again, your point about developmental sensitivity and, you know, the fact that all the way through till about 25, you know, is a period of developmental sensitivity. So why don't we just call it 30? Why don't we all just give
You
up
know,
our
I'm just
devices?
I want to smack my head on the keyboard right now. I'm just sitting there
It's
thinking,
like, you know, the people
oh
who want 16 to be 16, and there's people who want it to be 18. I'm like, what about the developmental period of sensitivity at 19?
no.
Like, do you just want to
Yeah.
round it up to 20? Like, it's never ending. And what I kind of get frustrated about is it's, you know, even if we did those things,
Hmm.
let's
Hmm.
add in real education. Let's talk about the
Yeah.
skills that you need when you turn 16 or 18 or 22 or whatever it is to actually navigate some of the intricacies of human behavior when it's facilitated by whatever device.
Mm.
And we didn't get those lessons. We've learned it by just being in the space and experimenting and maybe
Yeah,
at
yeah,
our
yeah.
core being nice people. But we need to kind of talk about these things. Yeah, and that's just completely missing because the conversation just goes back to blanket banning and creating technology that's somehow magically going to circumvent VPNs. Like VPNs won't work, and we will only know how old you are using all of this technology that maybe doesn't exist yet.
Uh, Absolutely. And there are so many technological problems with and that's something I'm writing about at the moment, in terms of this just, and I always call it the just. Well, just use AI or just use facial recognition or just use, yeah, okay. The complexities of how we use a technological intervention for a human-based problem is not as easy
Yeah.
as many just people think.
Yeah.
And
And
again,
when it comes, like ultimately it comes from a distrust of a platform. So you
mhm.
create another platform and another tech company in order to develop trust with, in order to hold on to really important information. It just kind of amplifies the problem to me.
Yeah, and
Um,
who gets to be judge, jury, and executioner by saying, well, actually, our, you know, whether it's our technology, our platform, and again, I do see this at the moment, like, oh, we're the ones that can do this, and I'm really struggling with this facial recognition, kind of age recognition technology, mainly because I work as a clinician with many children who have what's known as in utero trauma. So they have things like fetal alcohol syndrome. They have substance dependent mothers and are born. So a lot of their actual physical development is changed in the womb, and their facial presentations, their bodies, the way they grow, given, and I don't want to
completely.
get too deep into the kind of human growth factor and
Mm,
all of the things that
mm,
happen
mm,
at
mm.
the biological level, they do not look like their peers. And therefore, how can we have, and this goes back to, gosh, this is another 2018 recording that I did with Justin Sherman, where we talked about the issues around facial recognition technology and how they get programmed by human beings. Therefore, they have the biases implicitly woven into them. And anyway, that would take us down the road of
Yeah.
just the technology. But I am going to come back to, you and I work with a developmental lens. You know, it's almost like we're not using that word all of the time, but actually that's exactly what we're talking about here. This is about human beings developing in a world of technology. And there's so many ands that are coming out of my head at the moment, that there is something here about, so how do we, without blaming parents, which is what's happening at the moment, how do we help with evidence that's based in many, many years of understanding what development looks like with and without technology, because you and I are blessed enough to have both of those experiences. And I'm not saying that puts us over the edge of 21, but just a little bit. And yet there is this thing about, where do I want to go with this? Because I'm going to make it's going to be another public dig. But I did see a particular social psychologist showing a video on Twitter of a little boy who was running around, and he'd said, oh, look at this, absolute free play. Look at him developmentally. This is exactly what he needs. I looked at the video and went, okay, that is not secure attachment. That is a child who is not connected to their primary caregiver because there wasn't once that check-in, that check back. This was a little boy who was just running away in a direction where he had not got to a stage where, you know, whether you want to call it like a psychological distance or an electromagnetic distance, there wasn't even the need to check back in as to where the parent was. And I looked and went, this is somebody who doesn't understand developmental in children. So how can we use a developmental lens to think about what we're doing in using your digital nutrition approach, thinking about the space we're in at the moment of, well, let's take this technology away, but let's not think about all of the other sectors of life that you're talking about here, because this is a complex situation. So I've started to use the phrase cyber biopsychosocial, even though I could, and I might change it to techno biopsychosocial, but that makes me sound like I'm off to a rave somewhere. So I'm going to stick with cyber. Because of cyber psychology and cyber synapse and so on, it is old school. But we live in an environment now where, and you began actually starting today with the acknowledgement of where you are in time. So we also have this temporal approach. We've got the spiritual approach. We haven't taken any of that into account. We've just said, let's get rid of these darn things, because I'm just going to say the proposition is probably, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand why my child is using that thing, so I want it gone.
And it feels intuitive to me. Like it feels like this is the thing. And if that thing wasn't there, all these other things would go away, when it's actually the opposite. And, you know, spoiler alert, when you work with me, you're not just getting skills about how to manage your kid's phone. You're getting skills on how to communicate in a nonviolent context. Right. And, you know, to use nonviolent communication, it's not about not abusing them, but actually changing your language to be less weaponized and to be less pointy and to be more collaborative, to be more curious. You're learning about neurodevelopmental approaches so you can use that with your young person to say, hey, this is why we sleep. Isn't this wild? There's a drainage system. And when your brain goes through all these different waves of sleep, it's like cleaning out mental cobwebs. That's why we need to sleep. What do you think? Now you know that about your body, and you know that about how this device might compel you to be online for longer than maybe you would like to. What should we do together to help us get that need met, but also have your sleep needs met? I don't come in with this prescriptive, you must do this, otherwise, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, who are you?
You mean people come to you and expect you to be the expert, and you're supposed to tell them how to be the wonderful parent, and what you're actually doing is helping facilitate co-created
Crazy, right? And I will very clearly say, I am not an expert in parenting. I have one child. I'm only 7 years into that journey. I am not going to proclaim anything based on that. I know stuff about humans. I know a lot about the world, and I see a lot of connections through, you know, again, like many years of sometimes feeling like I was lost and I didn't know what I was doing, and it all coming together around the time I was about 45. But placing parents as experts in their own family, saying I know some stuff about other things like cyber psychology, when they come together, we create a plan that's going to work for you. Will it work easily, quickly, and in one go? No. Will you have to keep iterating? Will your kid keep changing? Absolutely. And so I think because there's such a need for the silver bullet, need for the solution, need for the magic number of how many minutes of screen time, we gravitate to that, and therefore we gravitate to simplistic solutions because we're too busy to actually read the data, quite frankly. Anybody who reads some of the books about generations feeling anxious probably didn't really read it because it's really dry and boring and you need high level stats, right? Like people who say, oh yeah, I read that. And I was like, you probably skipped to the end bit with the 4 new norms, which is a tiny part, 70 pages compared to 90 pages of bibliography. Not that I've counted. My point is, I guess, that we have to embrace that messiness of being a human and be curious enough to sit with the complexity and be committed to our kids and our lives to unpack it.
Wow, I absolutely love. I think you and I work very similar clinically in terms of that. Let's give the young people information. So I'm going to throw this back to the adults that are listening, because it will be adults that are listening. Okay. Given that you know that alcohol is considered a poison and that junk food is not particularly healthy, and some of you might be aware of vaping and cigarettes and not exercising, and now you know that, hey, let's think about how often are you going to drink, eat junk food, not exercise, and Now, for those on the audio version, I'm pulling a smirky face at this point, because you know what? Even when we give the adults this information, who are cognitively through through that developmental process, we are talking post 25 here. So, in neuroscience terms, in air quotes, yet again, have a mature brain. Therefore, all of that thinking can be done, and yet we know people overeat, they underexercise, they overconsume products that they know are unhealthy, even though we have been doing health campaigns and passing on information for many, many years. We have the highest levels of obesity and diabetes in the world ever in history. So if the adults can't get it right around food, how are young people supposed to get it right about all the other stuff that they engage in?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, and also, as you were talking, Jocelyn, there is this thing about, so when we think about putting these restrictions, bans, approaches into fruition, and we do things like you've talked about with the smartphone ban that's happened at school, and then we have these kind of anecdotal, well, they seem happier, or this is happening. What do we do when we're in a society? And I'm just thinking about what happens here in education in the United Kingdom, when the policies that get put into place are driven by a lack of holistic information. Now, what I mean there is the behaviour policies in the schools in the United Kingdom are driven by a particular approach, which is to do with if said child doesn't turn up to school for X number of hours per week, put them in inclusion. If they are absent for X amount of days, find the parent. If they are, and it's all about numbers, behaviour, and yet that nuanced level of, and what's going on at home for this family? How can we help support this child into learning what's going on for them? So when you take away that level of chicken little manic panic, and you actually start to look at and I love the fact that you're Australian, you say data and we say data. Data and datum. There is an element of, how do we have these conversations when people like yourself, Pete Etchells, who I've interviewed, Dean Burnett, they're sensible people who have been in this arena for more than 5 years. And I am just going to make that statement again, that there are very many people who have suddenly arrived as experts, if they want to call themselves that, and considered specialists in this area, and yet do not have that 25, 28, 30 plus years of being around since the internet began. Yeah. How do we even have these conversations if we're not included?
Look, and I think the thing is, what we're presuming then is that government policy is based on evidence, and that politicians and policymakers go seeking best practice international research, rather than the way that politics works is often, like lobbyists, the squeaky wheel, the people with the, 100,000 signatures on an online poll.
Mm.
should we raise the age to 16? Yes. I mean, if we did an online poll, should we pay you more? Would you like a pay rise? Yes. At what cost? With what information? Like, I don't think we're critical enough as people filling out forms or surveys to actually
Yeah.
understand the implications of this. And so I think it's more about the machinations like that shock horror. Our policies actually aren't made on best practice. They're made on personal kind of interest often,
Yeah.
or we find the cherry pick data that fits the narrative and the confirmation bias and the feeling, that we come to. And I've seen debates
Mm-hmm.
between social psychologists and researchers where like one person is debating based on pure heartstring and emotion. There is not
Yeah.
data in
Yeah.
that. There is just emotion. And the other researcher who's like, yeah, but like, put that aside. I thought I was here to talk about research. I thought we were having a research to research, but we're having a apples and research or fear and research kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
conversation. Then with the people who are, I guess, new to the space, and look, I absolutely say I am one tiny, tiny player here in Australia, and I look to, much bigger, brighter stars like Professor Amanda Third, who does a lot
Yep.
of work with
Yep.
Sonia Livingston, Joe Robinson from Origin. Like there's a range of like all of those big organizations down here who have come out together signing letters saying, we don't believe this works. It needs to be multi-pronged. Spending a lot of money to raise the age when it's unlikely to actually be effective. It's going to take
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
good 2 to 3 years. If it's so important, like there's a range of things that levers that we can pull much, much sooner. It is, yeah. Anyway, my point being, I don't claim to be some kind of like know-it-all, absolutely everything. I'm a voice who's been chipping away at this, quite solo for a long time. But there are lots of new voices in the space, and that's to be, I guess, expected. It's, I guess, the underpinnings of the nuance and the perspective and the holistic kind of approaches that they bring generally do just slice and dice and haven't, to me, there's just a range of people who look like, well, not look like, but like appear and speak as if they actually have never played a video game. They've never sat with a kid who is playing video games and having a good experience.
Yeah.
And the reality is, out of the millions of humans today who go onto the internet and do a range of activities, not much happens, right? Like all those big scary things don't happen. And it's easy to jump. And again, when we look at, what makes the news, it's not like a whole bunch of kids went onto the internet and made something. It's like this one kid went onto the internet and these horrible things happened.
Yeah.
So we need to look at it again. That's a bigger, like, just if we look at the process of what makes the news or what makes a story that my kid wants to watch, it's not like she went to school, she played with her friends, it was fun. She came home and, ate a dinner and went to bed.
So actually, we're talking about neuroscience there, really, aren't we? That's the what brains do on a daily basis is pay attention to things that could be threatening, of many ilks, because that's an interesting word in itself anyway. But what we tend to do is the boring and mundane just gets shifted to the side, and then we focus in on these outliers. And it seems to be, so what I've been writing about at the minute. So in one of the chapters is I talked about my, gosh, this is going to show my age up again. But in the 80s, in the 90s, sort of that era, there used to be a television program in the United Kingdom called Crime Watch, right? And Crime Watch used to show all of the awful things, and we're looking for this person. And when CCTV was as good as it is now, because I'm not sure,
Yeah.
it's amazing, isn't it? We've got 4K televisions, we've got amazing smartphones with hundreds of millions of megapixel cameras, and we still can't get CCTV right. But these images would be shown, and the one thing that would be said at the end of that show every time it ended is, don't have nightmares. What that program actually did was caused a chicken little of, oh, you can't go out on your own. If you go out, you've got to be home by this time because, Crime only occurs after 9 o'clock at night when the sun's gone in, and all of these kind of thinkings. And again, I'm going to go back to, I think we talked off air. It's like the Daniel Kahneman approach. You tend to make assumptions based on something very, very small that happens very, very few times compared to the mundane. And if we
Mhm.
focus in on that particular issue, this is the thing about social media, isn't it? It's the negativity bias. But if we focus in on that thing, then we say all children. And suddenly we've made this connection that isn't necessarily true, may sometimes be true, but it's based on the fact that the world can be and is at times dangerous in many different ways. And the analogy I keep seeing being used at the moment is around cars and seatbelts,
Mm.
not numbers of cars created, speed at which cars can go. It's literally cars, seatbelts. So if we talk about cars and seatbelts, there we are. We've thought about all of the issues rather than, okay, so we have a society in which if you drive too fast, you either get points on your license, you have to go and do some training,
Mhm.
or you have to be taught about driving in the first place. So what we've said is it's okay, just give them cars when they can wear seatbelts, problem resolved.
Absolutely. I love that analogy, right? The cars and licensing, people were talking at a summit at South by Southwest Sydney a couple of weeks ago. Oh, we should have digital licenses. I'm like, we have those. We have, the Alana and Madeline Foundation has had an e-license for 10 years. The idea, and these are some people coming new to the space and saying, we need to do something. And they haven't even looked at the people who have been in these
hmm
spaces
hmm
trying to get, and again, not necessarily a blanket license, but put these processes in place. So I can't remember who I heard this from, but somebody years ago, I said that when cars first came out, we didn't drive cars. We had a chauffeur. It was so special, and you were so rich generally that
Mm.
you didn't learn to drive your car. You had somebody drive your car for you. And then if you look at the first cars, they didn't even have roofs. There was no seatbelts. There were no road rules. We've built those in, and it's been tacked on. And what Australia's e-safety office talks about is safety by design. So we now
Yes.
build cars with safety components, as well as driving safely, but designing tech products with safety at the core, as well as then teaching people how to use things safely, parents how to, observe and model the right kind of behavior. The other thing about it too is we have very clear rules for when you drive too far over the speed limit by a certain number of kilometers, you lose X number of points, you are fined X number of dollars. It's really clearly prescribed.
Yeah.
Whereas in families, you did this thing, therefore you're not having the iPad for a week is not prescribed and usually out of whack with the punishment doesn't fit the crime.
Yeah.
So there's lots that we can learn from driving. I also have been using the swimming lesson and pool analogy that, we don't throw our kids into the surf at 16 and say, oh, well, do your best. We have a range of different ways that, in Australia, we're very good on the pool safety and the water safety. We're in the pool with our 9-month-old bouncing around, pretending Humpty Dumpty's falling off the wall into the pool. We're doing a
Yeah.
range of things that stage, even if you don't become, an Olympic swimmer, that you are safe around different types of water. And then, you know how to read the flags and swim between the flags. The lifeguards are actually trained and know how to
hmm
save you. Unlike in the digital waters, parents are like, I don't know what Roblox is. I don't know how to put a parental control on. Well, that's part of that responsibility, I think, isn't that, kids
Yeah.
need to be a certain age. Parents actually need to have a certain level of skill.
And I mean, this is again, because you and I have been in this space for a long time, this is what I talk about, the chasm in the middle, in terms
Yeah.
of the parents say, but I don't know how to do that because technology's made it so difficult, which is absolutely true because the internet providers, the device providers, the router providers, the blah, 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 everybody's got a different way of doing things and everything
Mm.
conflicts with each other. And so parents, and let's go back like that 27, 28 years, certainly absolved themselves of this particular responsibility because of a fear, not because they're uncaring parents. So
Yeah.
I give examples all the time about one of my neighbours. Her child was 12 or 13, I think it was, and he came round and he was telling me about playing Grand Theft Auto. And I had to go and knock on her door and say, do you realize what the game is? And she said, oh, it's just about driving cars. And I had to say, go and get the box. And we talked about the numbers on the back and I explained what the game was. And the moment we had the conversation about, so what this game allows him to do is, that was when she said, oh, he told me it was a driving game. Uh-huh. This is a little bit like the kids that come in and say, oh, no. We just go into the football field, but there won't be anybody there. And we certainly won't be drinking or smoking or, okay, parents are wise to knowing what happens in the real world because they lived it. And this is it's kind of like a chunk in time, isn't it? Because parents didn't and don't necessarily know what the digital space is like or the cyberspace or whatever you want to call it, the environment, it makes it difficult for them to do that parenting role. And of course, this is the issue with the recent year in terms of look at these rates of this and look at that, and it's all your fault for giving them the thing that you didn't understand that we're all on as well. Because I think some of this is to do with adults who hadn't realised they'd been manipulated and their data's been taken. And because we're angry, because we're scared, we're now pointing fingers. And sadly, the tech companies blame in one direction, politicians point in another, education points in another, parents point in another, and the kids are in the middle. And it's been like that for a long time. And I'm repeatedly saying at the moment, the issues that are facing children now, the ones that we're all talking about, are the same ones that existed when the internet began. They are
Yeah.
different, but they are the same. The volume might be different, but again, if you look to those statistics in terms of the outliers that we talked about earlier, I'm not entirely sure that the numbers of users and the numbers of these statistics of bad things happen is any different in terms of being able to do a comparison to numbers of users compared to number of users that were harmed if we were to do it against, I don't know, countries that have just received the internet, 1996, I don't know. If we
Yeah.
did a comparison, a bigger meta comparison.
Yeah. And I think, like obviously we want those numbers to decrease anyway, right? Whatever they are, we can do some work to decrease them. But what is the most effective way to do that, knowing that we can never make it zero, right? A couple of things there. One is like this whole digital native kind of furphy that, oh, well, they know the space and we're immigrants. We don't know. No, they're digital orphans. It's not like
Yeah.
immigrants often kind of come in and they go, okay, what do I need to learn? How do I assimilate? Terrible word, but they work out the lay of the land and they're hardworking and they're curious and they really want to be there. They're digital orphans. They had no other generation above them to guide them and show them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So they did what they needed to. And the idea that, yeah, I guess then maybe it's me. I just know human nature applies whatever context, cyber lens or not.
Yeah.
Of course, kids are going to fib to you. Of course, they're going to kind of duck and weave and try and get their needs met, especially where there's not trust and safety with a parent. That if I've come to you and told you about some little stuff that's happening and you're like, oh, blah, 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 leave me alone. I've got to finish my email or that, just talk to your friends about it or whatever, and they feel dismissed, they're not coming to you to say, talking to somebody on the internet, and I think they might actually be about to sextort me. They're just not going to come to you with that stuff because fear of being minimized and B, having their phone taken away is the first response because we don't know what else to do.
So there might be a social media video that I've done on exactly that.
There you go.
Yes. This is the biggest issue. This is not about tech, is it? You and I are probably spending most of our time saying it's got nothing to do with the tech. This is about how you talk to your kid. This is about how you have a relationship with them. This is about how you build trust. This is about.
So when they come to me, they come for what they want and you give them what they need. So they come to me wanting a solution for whatever, and I give them the tech use agreement, which is actually how to communication skills. It's how to manage change in your home, how to work collaboratively with a person that you want to be able to control, but actually you don't have very much control of anymore. because they're as big as you, if not bigger, for, many, mums with teenage boys. That can be quite difficult. And, a lot of the clients that I've had where there are really pointy and gaming addiction, if we want to use that word, but, really pathological use. There's a fear-based component because that kid is so big that a parent cannot actually physically get them to do anything different. So
do you know,
it's all mushed in.
That's reminded me of, and it keeps popping up on my, I'm sure the algorithm is trying to provoke me at the moment, right? Because
I'm
this
sure.
particular video keeps coming up, and it's of, I think it might be a child in, I don't know, it's Eastern European space or somewhere like that. And this parent is kind of trying to, and this is, it's a video that's suggesting this is what addiction looks like, but actually, oh my goodness, this is disconnected parenting. And effectively, the woman comes up and she's like, turn it off, and towers over this little boy who must be about 10, 11, something like that. And he says, Mum, I just need to read this. And she goes, I don't care, blah, 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 getting very stroppy. And you can see the escalation in emotions. And then she pulls the plug out and he goes on one, right? He gets up and he starts screaming, I hate you, I hate you. And then underneath this, again, one of the people in the spaces of social media, this is a clear indication of addiction. And I'm like, that is absolutely an indication of missed communication. And the fact that the parent was coming in with this particular approach and didn't connect, didn't hear the child, totally missed what was going on. Yeah,
If
we
that
are
child was reading a book, right?
blaming. Whoa,
Yeah. But
yeah.
if that child was reading a book and they said, Mum, I really want to finish this chapter. Oh, yes, darling. Right.
Unless it's
So,
50 Shades of Grey.
yes, in which case, or Anarchist Cookbook or
It's,
whatever.
it's,
But, like in my home, I was noticing like my kid loves YouTube, loves TV, right? We went camping, beautiful time, didn't talk about screens for 3 days, came home and hugged the TV. I'm not joking, right? This year, because she's getting older and she's really hard to get off the TV and get ready and some other stuff, we said no screens in the morning. Cool. Okay. All of the behaviors of delaying getting ready, of like just one more minute, is now on craft and reading. So anything that I thought it was because it was screens and YouTube's too sticky and she's just in this zone and it's giving a brain rot, it's the same behavior now that she's learnt to read. And, like she has a whole craft room, like at least screens are tidy. The craft is bloody well everywhere. And I find all these little bits and bobs and blah. But, like we praise that, oh, she's crafting. She still will not stop crafting and get ready for school so we're not late. So I just want to kind of share that from the perspective of the thing that's driving us crazy as a parent is the thing. And I cannot, like, short of pushing her into her room and putting her clothes on, I cannot just make her, spontaneously think, Mom, I'm just going to go and get ready on time because I really want you to be happy, right? I have to train her into that. And we've gotten into a really good system where she's got a tick box. And we put the time that she could be ready earliest. And now it's going to be like, you're ready for school at 7 o'clock and I can't take you there. So we've just got to like keep working with the medium and be curious and have fun and get out of our own way of like all the other bullshit we tell ourselves.
and this is, oh my goodness, I'm just thinking this is about, well, actually,
Sorry, that was a bit ranty.
no. The clinical things that I deal with, like, and I sent them to go and get their socks and they didn't come down for 10 minutes because they were playing with the Lego. And I'm like, yep. I mean, unfortunately, we do live in a time at the minute where that would be classified as a distraction. Therefore, that could possibly be ADHD and then we just have a whole set of other things that pathologize children. But let's just
we'll leave
park that, Kath. Park that. But I am really thinking here that actually that digital orphans, I really like that in terms of there are some parents who want to go with their child and learn about the technology, and there are so I'm privileged. I am a tech savvy parent, and my children were brought up with a tech savvy parent, so everything that they did we talked about, but also I was aware, and I am still aware of the risks, the issues, the dangers, because they are very different. But certainly there's a lot of parents who might listen to this actually, who are, okay, now I know what I need to do. I've got a parental responsibility. But actually, there's going to be a whole set of parents who never listen to this, who really do not care because you know what? Give Timmy the little device, tell him to naff off up to his bedroom. And you know what? I get to watch my television. I get to be on my device. I can talk to my friends. And I hear this. Let's take tech off the table just 1 minute. For a lot of the children I work with, they talk about I lived with a foster carer. She just got pissed all the time. I live with my parents and they're always rowing and they really don't care about me. There's a lot of children who live with a form of neglect in many different ways. And that's part and parcel of this orphanage, isn't it? In terms of this digital space, there are parents who really do not care, could not care.
And they don't have the capacity to care. I
Mm-hmm.
think for some people with their own trauma and their own nervous system dysregulation,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
just
yeah.
can't. In my community, actually, I know something slightly different. I live in a quite multicultural part of Sydney. And for some people, there's actually such a kind of point of privilege and showing off with devices. I can give my kid a new,
Mm-hmm,
very, very
mm-hmm.
expensive device. And that showiness and that sense of I am making it and I am being a good parent because I'm giving them the technology is actually like what I'm coming up against. Because I'm
Yeah.
seeing a lot of families, migrant families, culturally and linguistically diverse families who don't know that giving their 9-month-old a screen all day long isn't healthy,
Mm-hmm,
right, for
mm-hmm.
that brain development. And they're not doing it because they think, oh, just shut the kid up and please let me go and have my gin. They're doing it because they think that that is actually a very rich white way to do it. So it's unpacking some of that
Yeah.
for those families. Yeah.
We need a substantial change in what we think and say about this technology in terms of as you were talking there, I'm just thinking, yeah, there's definitely social justice issues around technology, access to technology, the removal of technology, which is being taken from that I'm going to call it middle class, particularly in the UK. The middle class
Yeah, it's
approach to
absolutely.
let's remove this tech because we would like whatever the outcome is. And actually, there's variances in who gets to use the technology, how they get to use the technology, when they get to use the technology. And I'm just thinking about the children, well, the young people really, whom I have worked with for a long time in residential settings. So these are the care homes that children are in, where staff members don't necessarily understand the tech. And I'll give an example where one child I worked with in a care home had been exploited, and the social worker had said, "Well, just turn the internet off on a night time on his console, because perpetrators only have a set schedule." But there is also this thing about we were sitting in the shared area where there was a television with a fire stick in the back of it. And I kind of looked at the staff and said, but you've just given them your laptop to get on the internet when you've got the TV, when you've got there's a lack of coherent narrative around this. I think this is where we're at the minute, isn't it? Is we don't have a we haven't had a long form conversation. That's what I'm really saying.
Yeah, I mean, people like go into conversations and I'm like, are we talking about social media or are we talking about phones? Are we talking about games? Are we talking about porn? What are we talking about? When you lump it all together, again, it just becomes like we're talking
Yeah.
about food. Well,
Yeah.
what kind of food are we talking about? We're talking about fast food. And the thing that we don't kind of ever remember is Morgan Spurlock's documentary was actually debunked because he was a raging alcoholic to begin with. That's why, Super Size Me was so whatever. Like everyone just goes, remember Super Size Me? Well, spoiler alert. So I guess my point is that we're still using such blunt instruments because we haven't been immersed in it, right? As adults, we didn't grow up with it or whatever. That's not, I don't think, an excuse. That should breed our curiosity to say that, therefore, it doesn't make me an expert, and I can't create these blanket ideas based on not a lot of experience, and then want my personal preference to be mandated for everybody else because I've had some sort of epiphany based on, reading a small slice of popularist content on this, to then want to like go on some crusade for the whole of,
and
the children.
Yeah.
I kind of just want to like make sure that I'm not dismissing that there are really pointy end problems with some, 1 to 3% of people with video games. Most of the time that comes from a range of complex predisposing factors.
Yes.
For some people, they will be bullied online. And again, that comes from a range of predisposing factors about humans being dickheads to one another over power and privilege. That happens offline and brings into I'm not discounting that there are problems online. I work with those problems. Yes. I am just saying those problems are polarizing because they're blown out of proportion and they're fear-based, that hijacks us into using these kind of simplistic narratives rather than taking a breath, stepping back and going, okay, who knows more about this and where are the approaches that we can apply meaningfully and consistently over time?
So what was I going to say? I don't know, but I am going to say, because I'm just aware of the time and I've just done that click on the what time are we on? I am aware that at this point in time there's a number of approaches, isn't there? There's a let's get rid of tech, there's a let's attack tech companies, let's do or provide solutions in this way, that way, or the other way, which tend to be based in tech, which is so interesting rather than human to human. Yeah. But also one of the things that I think that gets massively missed in this place is we are giving out advice about do this in your home, remove it from school, problem solved. I'm like, there's lots of other context and there's lots of other spaces and there's lots of other there's something about we've missed the bigger picture, and it's going back to your approach that you started with right at the beginning in terms of this is a much bigger issue because I don't know, we're talking about global. The internet is not situated in your city, in your home, in your no. Whether it's at your school. It doesn't just go away when you turn it off. Taking this away from children doesn't mean that they're not going to be exposed to it elsewhere, because what are you going to do? Follow your child around for 24 hours a day and make sure they never see anything? And the bit for me that I find really kind of synchronous on this is Charlie Brooker's been kind of approaching this on Black Mirror for quite some time now, in terms of you cannot get rid of this technology from your children's lives. So the more you try to restrain and restrict them, the more they're going to want to break out of that, aren't they? Because that's actually part of the developmental process.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I think too, the idea that, there's so many things here. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is a researcher who does the rounds. I've seen her speak 3 different times. She doesn't, she's just got her like thing that she goes with. She says that her 18-year-old is still not on social media. And I'm like, babe, your kid definitely has a burner phone and is on social media, right? You're in kind of some twilight zone around that. I can't remember what I was going to say. You were talking about Charlie Brooker, and then I was like, yes, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember. I'm going to have a 9 p.m. blank because I'm
That's
now
okay. That's okay.
12-hour day. What did you say though? You said he's been talking about this for ages, blah, blah. I can't remember. Anyway, it's gone.
Do you know what? Let's say that's the end of the day. That's the end of the chat. That's the end of the day. That's the end of the chat.
And I'm like,
yeah, right then. Thank you very much. And we will.
So good to talk to you. Like we could just go on for a long time. If people do want to try my how to design your family's tech use agreement, in fact, co-design your family's tech use agreement, I can give you a discount code. Maybe we can share that out to people. Perfect. So they can, if they like what they're hearing, they can try it. And if they've got their own way of banning, go for it. Tell me how it works.
Yeah, said like a true podcaster, and all of the details will be in the show notes and da. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope that was all okay. Yeah.
Yeah,